Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. When I was 19, I spent the autumn living with my uncle in Salem, Massachusetts. He owned a small old funeral home that had been in our family for 3 generations. It was the kind of place that always carried a faint odor of formaldehyde mixed with the chill of cold steel. From the moment I stepped inside, I felt as though I wasn't alone, even when there was nobody else around. My uncle was a reserved, eccentric man with peculiar habits and very strict rules. He warned me never to open the front door after midnight and to always knock twice before entering the preparation room. But the most important rule, the one he emphasized with a grave seriousness, was that I should never open the 3rd casket inside the cold chamber. He didn't say it as a joke. His face turned pale when he mentioned it. I assumed he was only trying to frighten me, like some twisted initiation into the family business. Still, I nodded and assured him I understood, even though I had no real intention of snooping. The cold chamber was used to keep bodies before embalming, and it always remained locked. Only my uncle had the key, and he rarely entered unless it was absolutely necessary. One night, about 3 weeks after I arrived, my uncle got an unexpected phone call and had to leave. He put me in charge, saying he'd only be gone a few hours, and that he wasn't expecting anyone to show up. Before walking out, he gripped my shoulder and looked me square in the eyes. "Don't go into the cold chamber," he said. "No matter what happens, no matter what you hear." That last part unsettled me. I asked what he meant by "what you hear," but he gave no response. He just put on his coat and left without another word. It was the first time I'd ever been completely alone in the building through the night. I wasn't exactly terrified, but the way he said those words replayed in my head like a relentless echo. I tried to distract myself by tidying up the main hall and organizing paperwork. The building was old, and each gust of wind made the walls creak. From time to time, I heard noises, faint thuds, subtle groans, distant cracking sounds. I kept telling myself it was nothing but pipes and old wooden beams settling. It was around 1:30 a.m. when I heard it for the first time, a soft tapping. At first, I thought someone was at the front door, but when I went to check, no one was there. The sound returned, louder this time, and I realized it came from the back, right where the cold chamber was. I froze, straining my ears, trying to convince myself it was something mechanical, maybe a tray shifting or a shelf creaking under weight. But then it came again. 3 slow, evenly spaced knocks, deliberate. Not someone trying to get in, someone trying to get out. My uncle's warning crashed into my memory, and I staggered back, my heart pounding like it wanted to break free from my chest. I ran to the office, shut the door, and tried to drown out the sound. But curiosity gnawed at me more and more with each passing minute. I couldn't stop thinking that maybe someone or something was trying to reach me. I held out until about 2:45. The knocking had stopped, but the silence felt even heavier, almost unbearable. I swore I wouldn't open anything. I'd just peek inside to make sure everything was fine. I went to the spot where my uncle kept his spare keys. 2 brass ones dangled from the key ring, one for the front door, the other for the cold chamber. I hesitated for a moment before taking the second key and slowly making my way down the hall. The walls seemed narrower, the air sharper and colder. My fingers shook as I slid the key into the lock. The door groaned open with a long metallic creak that seemed to travel through the entire building. Inside, the chill was brutal, much colder than I'd imagined. The overhead lights flickered weakly. 3 metal caskets rested on rolling trays, their lids fastened with bolts. Every instinct screamed for me to leave immediately, to shut the door and never come back. But I stepped in carefully, deliberately avoiding looking too long at the 3rd coffin, as if it could suddenly reach out and grab me. That one looked older than the rest, stained with rust and dented on one side. It had no label, which was strange. Every body came with documents. This one was completely anonymous. Suddenly, the second casket shook, and I nearly stumbled backward. Against every ounce of reason, I moved closer, pressing my ear against the cold metal. I didn't know what I was expecting to hear, but what reached me froze my blood. A slow, steady breath. Calm, rhythmic, alive. I bolted, slamming the door shut, twisting the key so violently it felt like my survival depended on it. Whatever was in there didn't belong to this world, or at least not anymore. I spent the rest of the night barricaded in the office, jumping at every noise. My uncle returned not long after dawn, looking more exhausted than I had ever seen him. He noticed the keys were out of place, but he didn't scold me. He simply walked toward the cold chamber. I heard the door creak open and then a long, heavy sigh, thick with sorrow. When he came back, he sat down across from me. "I told you not to open it," he muttered without lifting his eyes. "I didn't open it," I replied, but I heard breathing. For the first time, I saw fear in his face. "That's why I warned you never to listen too long," he said. I wanted to ask what was inside that third coffin, but the words caught in my throat. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. Finally, he whispered something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "It doesn't want to get out. It wants attention. And once you give it that, it follows you." He stood up, opened a locked cabinet, and poured himself a drink. I had never seen him touch alcohol before. He stared into the glass as though searching for answers I wasn't ready to know. Then he added, "We should have never accepted that delivery." He explained that years ago, a transport company had left it there by mistake. It didn't belong to any service, and it wasn't listed with any body. There was no name, no record, just that sealed, dented coffin. My grandfather, who had run the funeral home at the time, refused to send it back. He claimed it was a special case and ordered that it be left alone. But soon the strange events began. Lights flickering, rooms turning icy for no reason, whispers seeping through the vents. People stopped coming to services. The business nearly collapsed. In the end, they moved it into the cold chamber, believing that keeping it chilled somehow pacified it, dulled its awareness, maybe put it to sleep. But from time to time, whenever someone lingered too close or stayed there too long, the coffin would knock, as if reminding them it was still there. I asked why they had never destroyed it or buried it. He shook his head. "You can't bury what refuses the earth," he told me. He added that someone had tried back in the 90s. They found the worker collapsed beside the coffin, eyes wide open, lips blue. I didn't want to hear more, but deep down I already knew. I was bound to it now. I had heard it breathe. That tied me to it. My uncle warned me never to acknowledge it again, never to speak to it. "You've already drawn its curiosity. Don't make it feel welcome." For the rest of the day, I felt something watching me. Even walking through Salem's narrow streets, I sensed an invisible weight, like dragging a shadow that wasn't mine. Every place seemed to echo my steps back to me. That night in the guest room, I heard it again. Not knocking, not breathing, a low whisper right by the window. It didn't come from outside. It came from the direction of the cold chamber. It called me by name. I didn't sleep at all. I lay staring at the door, paralyzed. The next morning, I asked my uncle if he had heard anything. He didn't answer immediately. He just stared into his coffee cup. Then he looked at me and said, "Now you need to leave." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. "You opened a door the moment you listened," he continued. "You let it know you were willing to hear it. That's enough for it." He helped me pack and personally drove me to the bus station. I didn't return to Salem for many years, but the strange presence began to follow me no matter where I went. I would receive letters without a sender, envelopes with nothing inside. Once I got a photograph of a coffin sitting in the snow. The nights were the worst. Faint tapping sounds inside the closet. Always 3 knocks. No more, no less. Once I even saw mist in the air, though the heater was on. I tried therapy, prayer, even moving to the West Coast. But something was always there. Silent, invisible, like a hum inside the walls that vanished the second anyone else walked in. Years later, I learned my uncle had died. No exact cause was given. He just never woke up. He was buried in the family plot outside Salem. Against my instincts, I went back for the funeral. After the ceremony, I passed by the funeral home. The windows were boarded up, but one door was ajar. I don't know why, but I went inside. Everything looked frozen in time, untouched except for the cold chamber. Its door was wide open. The coffin was gone. A chain lay on the floor, snapped clean through, as if corroded overnight. There were footprints, barefoot, wet, too long to be human. And one more thing, a note with my name on it. I didn't read it. I burned it. That night I didn't go home. I drove until dawn. But at some point on the road I heard it again. A whisper closer than ever, coming from the back seat. Story 2. I used to help out at my uncle's funeral home in Seattle, mostly on weekends. It wasn't a glamorous job by any stretch, but it paid better than most part-time gigs. The place had been around since the 1920s, wedged between a rusted auto shop and an abandoned dry cleaner on Rainier Avenue. It always carried that hollow cold smell, an unsettling mix of dust, bleach, and something faintly sour, no matter how often it was scrubbed down. I still remember vividly the day the child's coffin arrived, mostly because the truck driver seemed nervous even before he unloaded it. He kept glancing over his shoulder, like someone was watching him from the alleyway. He handed my uncle the delivery slip to sign, but never said a single word. When he left, my uncle raised an eyebrow and muttered, "That guy looked like he'd seen a ghost." He gave a short laugh, but I noticed he didn't open the box right away. The casket was small, white with silver trim, the kind you only ever see in movies but never expect to encounter in reality. I helped him wheel it into the cold chamber, and even with gloves on, I swore I could feel the chill radiating from its surface. I figured it was just from the refrigerated truck, but the sensation lingered far longer than it should have. My uncle stood staring at the lid for a long time before whispering, "We weren't expecting this one." The next hour passed in silence, which wasn't unusual. There were no services scheduled that day, so the chapel remained unlit, and the whole building felt more like a mausoleum than a business. I was in the prep room organizing supplies when I heard my uncle curse under his breath from his office. That was unusual. He always kept his composure, even in the worst cases. I went in and found him flipping through a thick record book of death certificates and shipping manifests. "There's no name," he muttered. "No request, no documents, nothing. It came from a dispatch center, not a family." I asked if we should call someone, but he just shook his head slowly like he was trying to figure out what step had been skipped. No funeral home sends a body without notice. That doesn't happen. That afternoon I stayed later than usual. My uncle asked me to close up while he took a call in the embalming room. As I passed by the cold chamber, I felt something strange, like static in the air. Not a loud noise or bright light, but that heavy, charged feeling you get right before a storm breaks. I found myself staring at the little white coffin longer than I meant to before finally shutting the door. The next morning, my uncle seemed distant, like he hadn't slept. I asked if everything was okay with the delivery, but he didn't answer directly. "Do me a favor," he said. "Stay out of the cold chamber for a while." That wasn't a typical request, especially for me, since I'd cleaned that room dozens of times. I nodded, but the way he said it left me uneasy. By midday, curiosity got the better of me. My uncle had gone to meet someone from the coroner's office, and I had the place to myself. I stopped in front of the cold chamber door, his warning echoing in my mind, but I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe some paperwork had been lost. Maybe it was just a clerical mistake he didn't want me worrying about. I went in. Immediately, that heavy charged air hit me harder than before. It wasn't just cold, it was wrong. The white coffin sat in the center of the room untouched. I didn't open it. I couldn't. But I slowly walked around it, watching my breath rise in pale clouds. That's when I saw it. On the lid, 5 tiny handprints. They weren't dust, they weren't stains. They were frost. I stumbled back, my heart slamming against my ribs. I darted out, shut the door, and locked it almost without thinking. Half an hour later, my uncle returned. He took one look at my face and didn't need to ask. "You went in, didn't you?" he said. I nodded slowly. He sighed like he was carrying a weight far too heavy for his shoulders. I found the dispatch record, he explained. It came from a funeral home in Idaho, one that closed down 8 years ago. That night he stayed working late. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I couldn't get the casket out of my mind. So I hid in the storage room near the hallway just to see what he would do. Around 11 p.m., I heard him wheel the coffin out of the cold chamber. I peeked and saw him slowly lifting the lid under the dim yellow light of the prep table. He stood motionless for a long time. Then I heard him whisper, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." His voice cracked as if he were fighting back tears. At that exact moment, every light in the hallway flickered once, just enough to twist my stomach into knots. My hands shook as I crouched behind the door. I didn't know if I should reveal myself or stay hidden, but that flicker rooted me to the spot. My uncle didn't move for ages. He just stood there staring into the coffin like it had spoken to him. Finally, he closed the lid carefully, like someone tucking a child into bed. He rolled it back into the cold chamber, but this time he locked it with a different key, one I had never seen before. Without saying a word, he walked out the back door and drove away. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw those frozen fingerprints. I couldn't stop thinking. If no one had claimed that child, who put them in that coffin? And why send it to us? The next day, I couldn't hold it in. I confessed that I had seen everything. I asked him who the child was. He sat down slowly as if the weight of it all was crushing him. "I don't know," he said. "I've never had a case like this. No death certificate, no coroner's report, no name. And the worst part," he met my eyes. The coffin wasn't sealed. That made no sense. Every casket we received was sealed shut for transport, especially those meant for children. It was standard protocol. He explained that he had opened it expecting to find remains, but what he saw was different. A small body, pale and still, but not preserved. It looked fresh, far too fresh, as if the child had simply lain down for a nap. There were no signs of decay, no makeup, no embalming. The skin had color. The lips weren't blue, and the most disturbing part, the eyes were half open. I felt hollow inside hearing that. "Sometimes," he added, his voice trembling, as if afraid to even say it. "Sometimes I think they blinked." I didn't want to hear more. I told myself it was stress or his imagination. But then I remembered the icy handprints and the charged air in that room. Things that shouldn't have been there. That night back at my apartment, I shoved a towel under the door and left every light on. I couldn't explain why, but I didn't feel safe. Days passed, and we never spoke of it again. The coffin stayed locked away in the cold chamber, untouched. My uncle said we'd report it to the city and let them deal with it. But before that happened, someone showed up. It was Thursday afternoon. The sky was gray and the air smelled of rain. A woman appeared at the front desk. No appointment, no phone call. She wore an old wool coat and gloves despite the mild weather. Her voice was soft but steady. "I'm here for my daughter." I asked for her name. She didn't give one. She just looked at me, as if waiting for me to remember something. I told her we had no services scheduled, but before I could finish, she said, "White coffin, silver trim. It's in the cold chamber." In that instant, I knew something was wrong. I went to get my uncle. When I explained, his face drained of color. "We never gave out a name," he whispered. "No one knows it's here." We hurried back to the desk, but the woman was gone. We checked the security cameras. There she was, entering slowly, calmly, but there was no footage of her leaving, no doors opening, no motion by the exit. She had simply vanished. My uncle said nothing. He just stared at the frozen image of her on the screen. That same night, he moved the coffin into the rear chamber, isolated from the others, and told me not to ask any more questions. But I couldn't let it go. The next night, I snuck in after closing. I knew the code. I opened the rear chamber and stepped inside. It was even colder than before. The coffin sat in the middle, motionless, silent. I crept closer. I didn't plan to open it, but something in me had to. My hand shook as I reached out, my fingers numb from the cold. I lifted the lid, inch by inch, bracing myself for what I'd see. The coffin was empty. I froze, staring down into it, my breath clouding the air. The silence was suffocating, thick, as though something unseen was watching me from below. Then I heard it, a faint creak like the groan of wood under weight, but the floor was concrete. I backed away, every hair on my body standing on end. And then I saw them, 2 tiny footprints forming in the frost on the ground, just a few steps away. Then 2 more, and more after that. I didn't think. I just ran. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and bolted out of the building like it was on fire. That night I didn't go home. I didn't sleep. I just drove aimlessly through the city, looking for anywhere but there. The next day I spoke to my uncle. He didn't sound surprised, just tired. "I've seen her too," he said. He told me that ever since the coffin arrived, lights had been shutting off on their own. Voices murmured through the air ducts, and doors cracked open in the dead of night. I asked why he didn't get rid of it, why he didn't report it. He paused before answering, "Because I don't think we can." He admitted that once he tried driving it to the crematorium himself, but halfway there the brakes failed and the truck veered off the road. When they pulled it from the ditch, the back doors were wide open and the coffin was gone. That night when he returned to the funeral home, it was back in the cold chamber, untouched. That was the last time we ever tried anything. The coffin still sits there behind locked doors and extra barriers. But we both know it doesn't matter. That child, whatever it really is, never needed doors to move. Now we just pretend it isn't there. We keep the lights on, the doors shut, and avoid that hallway when we're alone. I don't work there anymore. I quit a few months after that night. My uncle still runs the place, but he hardly speaks now. Every once in a while he calls me, but when I answer it's nothing but static. And when I call him back, he swears he never touched the phone. I haven't stepped foot in that funeral home in over a year, but I still dream of it. Dreams of the cold chamber, of the footprints in the frost. And sometimes I dream that I open the coffin again, only this time she's awake. Story 3. Last summer I landed an internship at a funeral home in Milwaukee, mostly because it was one of the few places willing to hire someone with practically no experience. It was a small brick building wedged between an old Catholic church and an empty car lot. The owner, Martin, was a quiet but kind man. He had the weary look of someone who hadn't slept properly in years. From the very beginning, he told me 2 rules. Always treat the bodies with respect, and never under any circumstances go down into the basement. That second rule struck me as oddly specific, especially since he said it so casually. I figured it was some sort of insurance policy, or maybe just a liability concern. But the way he spoke made me feel he was dead serious, even when he smiled. The building carried a constant scent of roses mixed with formaldehyde that clung to everything. Even when the place was empty, it felt like someone was watching from behind the curtains. The cold chamber where the bodies were stored before preparation always seemed too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of silence, more like the kind where something is holding its breath. Martin handled most of the embalming work himself, while I answered calls and helped set up services. I didn't mind the silence, at least not until my second week, when I heard a faint knocking from the back wall. It wasn't loud, just enough to make me stop and listen. When I asked Martin about it, he simply said, "You'll hear things sometimes. Don't answer them." That sentence stuck in my head. What kind of reply was that? I wanted to believe he was joking, but he didn't laugh or explain. He just looked at me and walked away, like he had given me a weather report. That was the first time I truly began to feel uneasy in that place. A few days later, while rushing to prepare a viewing room, I dropped my access card near the cold chamber door. As I bent down to grab it, I noticed something strange. A faint line in the wall, almost like a hidden panel. I ran my fingers along it. It wasn't a crack. It was intentional, built into the structure. I waited until Martin stepped outside for a smoke break and went back to examine it. Curiosity got the better of me. When I pressed firmly, the panel gave way with a dull snap and slid inward with a grinding sound, like stone scraping against concrete. Behind it was a staircase leading down. I stood frozen, staring for what felt like minutes, my heart hammering. There was no railing, no light, just a set of cement steps vanishing into complete darkness. The air drifting up from below was freezing, colder than anywhere else in the building. I thought about going down, but a sudden wave of fear rooted me in place. That day I didn't. I shut the panel and pretended I had never seen it. But from that moment on, I couldn't stop thinking about what lay beneath. That hidden basement felt like it was waiting for something, or someone. Over the following days, I started noticing unsettling things. The cold chamber was sometimes locked, then mysteriously found open again, even though only Martin and I had keys. The lights in the prep room would flicker despite being fitted with brand new bulbs. Martin always blamed the old wiring. One evening I stayed late cleaning up after 2 back-to-back services. Martin had already left, so I was alone. As I took out the trash near the cold chamber, I heard something inside. Not the hum of the machines, but a rhythmic, steady knocking from within the wall. I pressed my ear to the door and froze. It wasn't just knocking. I heard breathing, soft, faint breaths behind the metal. I staggered back and bolted out without finishing my chores. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the staircase again. The next morning, Martin seemed on edge. He kept checking the front locks over and over, pacing the hallway as if he was waiting for someone. "Did you touch the cold chamber door last night?" he asked, not looking at me. I lied. "No." He nodded, but it was obvious he didn't believe me. Later that day, I caught him standing in front of the hidden panel. He didn't open it. He just placed his hand against the wall, eyes closed. I turned away before he noticed me. Whatever was down there, he knew, and he was afraid of it. That night, my curiosity finally broke me. I snuck into the funeral home after hours. I told myself I only needed to look, just to know. I carried a flashlight and I set my phone to record in my pocket in case something happened. I slid the panel open and began to descend step by step. The deeper I went, the colder the air grew. This wasn't air conditioning. It was damp, earthy, the kind of chill from a cellar sealed off for years. My flashlight flickered once but held steady. At the bottom there was a concrete floor and a heavy steel door secured with a thick padlock. It looked newer than the rest of the basement, like it had been installed recently. My hands trembled as I touched the handle. Nothing stirred on the other side, only my own breathing. I tried it. It wouldn't budge. My pulse raced. I had no idea what I was doing, but I couldn't turn back now. I had to know. In the corner, I spotted an old rusted crowbar. With shaking hands, I wedged it into the frame and forced the lock until it snapped. A blast of stale, icy air rushed out immediately. I pushed the door open slowly. The squeal of the hinges echoed through the darkness. What I saw inside defied logic. The room was small, much smaller than I expected. It was filled with rows of white plastic body bags, but some of them were moving. I blinked, convinced my mind was playing tricks. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was real. One of the bags was twitching, convulsing. I stumbled back, heart pounding. It couldn't be real. A body in that state shouldn't move. My mind scrambled for reason, but there was none. I took one more cautious step inside, and then I heard it. A whisper. The voice was faint, scattered, as if it came from every direction at once. "Help me." The sound was muffled, like it seeped out of the walls or rose up from the floor itself. My head spun and I struggled to breathe. Panic wrapped its claws around me. I needed to run, but my legs refused. I turned toward the exit. Then something caught my eye. At the far end of the room lay a different bag, smaller, still sealed. It wasn't on a table. It was crumpled on the floor, as if it had been tossed aside. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't look away. I approached, every inch of me trembling. Something felt wrong. Too still. Too unnatural. My fingers shook as I touched the zipper. The whispers stopped instantly. Silence. For a second, I thought I had imagined everything. I yanked the bag open. What I saw froze the blood in my veins. It was a child. A pale, lifeless child, with bruises circling the neck, as if strangled. No records, no documents, no explanation. And the worst part, inside the bag was a scrap of paper. One single word written on it. Please. That night I left the funeral home, but I didn't escape what I saw. Even now, years later, the image of that child and that word, please, haunts me. I don't know who hid him in that basement or why, but I'm certain I'm not the only one who knows. Every so often when the wind picks up, I still hear that whisper. Help me.